I spent my last 2 coins on a dying slave everyone called Defective. His wounds should have killed him. Strange black veins spreading like poison through his skin. But when our eyes met, I saw something that terrified me. Recognition. I had no idea I'd just bought the kingdom's most dangerous secret. Or that when midnight came, the wolf I saved would transform into something far more powerful than I ever imagined. Hey, before we dive in, tell me where you're watching from. What country are you in, and what time is it there? Sunrise in Sydney, midnight in LA, or sunset in Paris? I want to know. Drop it in the comments. Then let's get into the story. Chapter 1. The Fool's Purchase. The walk from the market square to my cottage felt like dragging a corpse. Kylam, that's what the auctioneer had called him before spitting at his feet, could barely stand. His massive frame leaned against me, each step a struggle against the poison spreading through his veins. Behind us I heard the town's laughter following like hungry dogs. Mireia the Mad, they called me, throwing away her last coins on a dead man walking. Let them laugh. I'd heard worse since my mother died and left me alone with her healing gifts and nothing else. My cottage sat at the edge of the forest, far enough from town that the suspicious glances couldn't reach me daily. I'd inherited my mother's knowledge of herbs and her strange ability to sense sickness in others like a physical touch. The town tolerated me because they needed healers, but they never trusted me. A woman alone, unmarried, with hands that seemed to know things they shouldn't, I was one bad harvest away from an accusation. Now I'd gone and made it worse by bringing home a northern slave everyone said was cursed. I kicked open my door and helped Kylam collapse onto the pallet by the fire. Up close, in the light, his condition was worse than I'd thought. The silver-black veins had spread further, creeping across his chest like frost on glass. I'd never seen poison work this way. It seemed alive somehow, feeding on him from within. His breathing came in shallow gasps, his skin burning with fever despite the cold sweat drenching his torn clothes. I should call for help. But who would come? The town wanted him dead, and they'd probably kill me for trying to save him. Stupid Mireia, I muttered, reaching for my medicine basket. Stupidly compassionate, stupidly hopeful, stupidly... My words died as his hand shot out and grabbed my wrist. His eyes flew open, but they weren't the winter blue I'd seen before. They blazed molten gold, something fierce and inhuman burning in their depths. He spoke, rough, desperate words in a language I didn't know. Then his grip loosened, and he collapsed back into unconsciousness, leaving me staring at my wrist where his touch had burned like fire. That's when I noticed something that made my blood run cold. My medicine basket had tipped over, and among the scattered herbs lay wolfsbane, the most deadly plant in my collection. I'd been reaching for it without thinking, my healer's instinct guiding my hand to the one ingredient that could counter his specific poison. But wolfsbane was lethal to humans in any form. So why had every instinct in my body screamed that it was exactly what he needed? What kind of man survives wounds like his? What kind of man has eyes that burn gold with fever? And what kind of fool was I for not asking these questions before bringing him into my home? Chapter 2. Midnight Revelation. I worked through the afternoon, crushing wolfsbane with trembling hands and mixing it with other herbs to make a poultice. Every healer's instinct I possessed screamed that this should kill him, yet something deeper, something I'd inherited from my mother along with her gift, told me to trust the knowledge flowing through my fingers. I applied the mixture to his wound, and the moment it touched his skin, the silver-black veins recoiled like living things. His body convulsed, a low growl rumbling from his chest that sounded nothing like human pain. "What are you?" I whispered, backing away as his muscles spasmed beneath his skin. For a moment I thought I saw something moving under his flesh, something that looked like fur trying to break through. Then it stopped. His breathing evened. The poison's spread slowed. I'd bought him time, but I had no idea for what. Outside the sun was setting, painting my cottage in shades of blood orange. I should eat, sleep, but I couldn't leave his side. Something about him pulled at me like gravity. like my soul recognized something in his that defied all logic. Midnight came softly, marked only by the distant church bells from town. I was dozing in my chair by the fire when I heard it. The sound of chains breaking. My eyes flew open to see Calum sitting up, his shackles lying in pieces on the floor as if they were made of clay instead of iron. But that wasn't what made me freeze in terror. His body was changing. Bones cracked and reformed beneath his skin. His spine arched impossibly. His hands curled into claws as fur erupted across his arms in waves of silver black that matched the poison I'd fought all day. I wanted to scream, to run, but I was paralyzed as his transformation completed. Where a dying man had lain moments before, now crouched a wolf the size of a horse. Massive, terrifying, and absolutely magnificent. His fur shimmered like starlight on water, and his eyes burned with that same molten gold. But now I understood what I was seeing. Not fever, not sickness, power. Ancient primal power that made the air itself tremble with his presence. This was no ordinary wolf. This was something from the old stories my mother used to tell, the tales of creatures that ruled before kingdoms existed. The wolf's gaze fixed on me, and I saw intelligence burning there. Human intelligence trapped in an animal form. He moved toward me slowly, deliberately, and I pressed back against my chair with nowhere to go. My heart hammered against my ribs as he lowered his massive head, and I felt his breath hot against my neck. Then he did something that shattered every assumption I'd made about my foolish purchase. He bowed. This terrifying creature, this being of such obvious power, lowered himself before me in a gesture of such profound submission that tears sprang to my eyes. "You're not a slave," I breathed, my voice shaking. "You never were." He made a sound, half growl, half whimper, and in that moment I understood. Whatever he was, whoever he truly was, I'd just saved someone far more important than I could have imagined. And by doing so, I'd tied my fate to his in ways I was only beginning to comprehend. The wolf's eyes met mine one last time before exhaustion claimed him, and he collapsed back into his human form, naked and vulnerable on my cottage floor. As I covered him with blankets, my hands shaking, I noticed something I'd missed before, a mark on his shoulder, beneath the poison wound. A royal seal, scarred over but unmistakable. I'd bought a king with my last 2 coins. Chapter 3. The Hunter's Arrival. Morning came with a pounding on my door that made my heart leap into my throat. Calum, I still thought of him by that name, remained unconscious, his breathing steady but deep, as if his body was recovering from something far more exhausting than mere illness. I'd covered him completely with blankets, hiding his nakedness and the mysterious mark on his shoulder. Whatever he was, whoever he was, I wasn't ready to share that knowledge with anyone. The pounding came again, harder this time, accompanied by a voice that made my blood run cold. "Mireia, open this door by order of Lord Thorn." I knew that voice, Captain Rowan Bloodmore, the king's hunter and the most feared man in 3 provinces. He specialized in tracking criminals and runaways, and he never failed to bring back his prey. My hands shook as I smoothed my skirts and opened the door just wide enough to see out. Rowan stood on my threshold, tall and severe in his black hunting leathers, his scarred face expressionless. Behind him stood 6 soldiers, all armed, all watching my cottage like hawks. This wasn't a friendly visit. "Captain," I said, keeping my voice steady through sheer will, "what brings the king's hunter to a poor healer's door?" His cold gray eyes swept over me, missing nothing. Not my disheveled hair, not my exhausted face, not the way I blocked the doorway with my body. "I'm searching for a dangerous criminal who escaped the capital's dungeons 3 nights ago. A northern spy who murdered 2 guards and fled south. Witnesses saw a man matching his description at yesterday's auction." My mouth went dry. "I don't know anything about murders or spies. I bought a dying slave for 2 coins. Everyone saw it." "Show me." It wasn't a request. Rowan pushed past me into my cottage, his men fanning out behind him with practiced efficiency. I wanted to protest, to demand a magistrate's warrant, but what good would that do? The king's hunter needed no permission to search wherever he wished. My eyes flew to where Calum lay by the fire, but Rowan's attention had already fixed on the still form beneath the blankets. He crossed the room in 3 strides and yanked the covering away. I held my breath, waiting for him to see the royal mark, to recognize whatever truth I'd stumbled into. But Calum's wound had closed overnight, the poison gone, leaving only smooth skin where the festering corruption had been. "This is him," Rowan said quietly, his hand moving to his sword. "The spy who's cost the king's justice 2 good men." Before I could respond, before I could think, he drew his blade and moved to strike. I threw myself between them, without thought, without plan, knowing only that I couldn't let him die, not after everything, not after the truth I'd witnessed at midnight. The blade stopped an inch from my throat. Rowan's eyes widened in surprise, then narrowed in calculation. "He's innocent," I gasped. "Whatever you think he's done, he couldn't have. He was dying when I bought him. He's been unconscious ever since." "Move aside, healer." Rowan's voice dropped to something dangerous. "You're protecting a murderer." But as he spoke, I felt movement behind me. Calum's hand closed around my arm, gentle, but unmistakable. When I turned, his winter blue eyes were open and alert, focused on Rowan with an intensity that made the temperature in the room seem to drop. He spoke, clear, commanding words in the northern tongue, and Rowan went absolutely still. Whatever Calum had said, it made the king's most feared hunter lower his sword and take 3 steps back, his scarred face pale with something that looked horribly like recognition. "Impossible," Rowan breathed. "You're dead. The entire northern kingdom fell. We saw the capital burn." Calum spoke again, shorter this time, and Rowan's men shifted uneasily, their hands falling away from their weapons. I stood frozen between them, understanding nothing, except that the power dynamics in my cottage had shifted entirely. Rowan stared at Calum for a long moment, then slowly, deliberately, knelt. His men followed immediately, their heads bowed in a gesture of submission I'd seen only once before, when the king himself had passed through our province. "Forgive me, Your Majesty," Rowan said, his voice rough with emotion. "We thought you lost." Chapter 4. The Broken King. The silence after Rowan's words felt thick enough to choke on. I looked between the kneeling hunters and the man I'd bought for 2 coins, my mind struggling to piece together what was happening. "Your Majesty?" I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. "He's the king?" Rowan's expression was grim as he straightened. "Not just any king. This is Calum Frostvine, rightful ruler of the Northern Territories, and the last of the Lycan bloodline. We received word 3 months ago that his kingdom had fallen to southern invaders, that he died defending his people. Clearly, our intelligence was incomplete." Calum spoke again, his northern accent thick, but his meaning clear enough that I caught fragments. Betrayal, poison, escape. His hand remained on my arm, steady and warm, as if I was his anchor to consciousness. Rowan listened intently, his scarred face growing darker with each word. When Calum finished, the hunter turned to me with an expression I couldn't read. "He says you saved his life, that the poison in his veins was wolfsbane laced with silver, a combination designed specifically to kill Lycans slowly and painfully. He should have been dead within hours of infection. How did you know to treat him?" "I didn't know," I admitted, my voice shaking. My mother taught me to trust my instincts when healing. Something told me wolfsbane was the answer, even though it made no sense." Rowan's eyes narrowed. "Your mother? Would that be Alara Bloodwillow? The witch who was burned 15 years ago for healing a nobleman's son with forbidden magic?" The cottage spun around me. My mother wasn't a witch. She was a healer. But even as I said it, I knew the truth I'd been hiding from all my life. The way plants seemed to grow faster under my mother's touch. The way she could sense illness from across a room. The way she'd made me promise with her dying breath to never let anyone see the full extent of what I could do. Your mother, Rowan said carefully, was one of the last hereditary healers. Those born with the gift of sensing and manipulating life force itself. It's an old magic, predating even the Lycan bloodlines. The church declared it witchcraft to eliminate potential threats to their power. He glanced at Calum, which makes you perhaps the only person in this kingdom who could have saved him. Wolfsbane doesn't counter Lycan poison. It burns it out, but only if applied with precisely the right touch. Too much kills the host. Too little does nothing. You found the balance by instinct. I pulled my arm free from Calum's grip, backing away from both of them. You're saying I'm a witch? That I used magic to save him? The word tasted like ash in my mouth, like burning flesh in screaming crowds. Calum rose slowly from the pallet, wrapping a blanket around his waist with unconscious dignity. When he spoke this time, his words were halting, but understandable. Not witch. Gift. My people. We honor such gifts. You saved my life. You have my protection, my gratitude. Always. His winter blue eyes held mine with an intensity that made my breath catch. But before I could respond, a soldier burst through the door, his face pale with fear. Captain, Lord Thorn's forces approach. 36 men, maybe more. They're surrounding the cottage. Rowan swore viciously. Thorn must have followed us. He's been hunting for any excuse to expand his lands, and finding a supposedly dead Lycan king would give him leverage with the capital. He turned to Calum. Can you shift? Fight? Calum's expression was grim. Not yet. The poison weakened me. By midnight, yes. But now... He swayed slightly, and I found myself moving back to his side without thought, steadying him with hands that had somehow stopped shaking. Then we fight, Rowan said simply, drawing his sword. His men moved to defensive positions around the cottage. Through the window, I could see Lord Thorn's forces spreading out, their weapons gleaming in the morning sun. We were outnumbered 6-1, trapped in a wooden cottage that would burn like kindling if they decided to smoke us out. Calum's hand found mine, squeezed once. I am sorry, he said quietly. You saved me. Now I bring death to your door. But as I looked into his eyes, I realized something that terrified me more than the soldiers outside. I didn't regret it. Not the 2 coins, not the risk, not even the revelation of my mother's gift. Whatever happened next, I'd made the choice to save him, and I would make it again. Chapter 5. The Fire and the Truth. The first arrow came through the window, embedding itself in the beam above my head. Rowan shoved me down behind the heavy oak table as more followed, a rain of death that turned my peaceful cottage into a battlefield. Stay down, he commanded, then turned to his men. Defensive positions. They'll try to force us out with fire, or wait for nightfall. Either way, we need to buy time. Through the gaps in the wooden walls, I could see Lord Thorn himself, a heavy-set man with cruel eyes and expensive armor that had never seen real battle. He sat on his horse well back from the fighting, directing his men like pieces on a game board. Calum crouched beside me, his body thrumming with barely contained energy. Even weakened, even unable to fully shift, he radiated dangerous power. I could kill him, he said quietly, his accent thick with rage. One strike. End this. Rowan shook his head without taking his eyes off the approaching soldiers. You're too weak, and he's too well protected. You'd die before you reached him. And then all of this, Mireya's sacrifice, our secrecy, would be for nothing. Kylem's hands clenched into fists, and I saw his nails lengthening into claws before he forced them back to human form. The strain of controlling his nature was written across his face in lines of pain. There's another way, I heard myself say. Both men turned to look at me, and I swallowed hard before continuing. My mother's journals. She left them hidden in the cellar, filled with everything she knew about healing and other things. Things she made me promise never to use. But there's a working in there. A protection ritual that could buy us time until midnight, when Calum can shift fully. Rowan's expression was grim. Protection rituals require sacrifice. What price does this one demand? I met his eyes steadily, though my heart hammered against my ribs. The caster's life force. Not death, but years. Decades, maybe. My mother wrote that she used it once to save an entire village from plague. She aged 30 years in a single night. No. Calum's word cracked like a whip. I forbid it. You will not destroy yourself for me. His hand caught my arm, and this time his grip was desperate, almost painful. I have lived a long time, seen much death. I will not add yours to the weight I carry. I pulled free, anger rising to match his. You don't get to forbid me anything. You're not my king. This is my home, my choice, my magic. The word hung in the air between us. Magic, the thing I'd denied all my life, now claimed with fierce certainty. If I don't do this, we all die. If I do, at least some of us might survive. The cottage shuddered as something heavy slammed against the door. A battering ram. Rowan's men braced themselves, weapons ready, but we all knew they couldn't hold forever. Through the cracks in the walls, I could see Thorn's soldiers piling wood and kindling around the foundation. They were going to burn us out after all. Decision time was running out like sand through my fingers. I didn't wait for permission. I ducked away from Calum's reaching hands and ran to the cellar door, yanking it open and plunging down into the darkness. My mother's journals were exactly where I'd left them, wrapped in oilcloth and hidden behind loose stones. My hands shook as I opened the largest volume, its pages yellow with age, until I found the protection working. The instructions were written in my mother's precise hand, with warnings in the margins that made my blood run cold. But beneath the warnings, she'd written something else, a note meant only for me. My dearest Mireia, if you're reading this, then the time has come for you to choose. The gift runs strong in you, stronger than it did in me. You can hide it, bury it, pretend to be normal and safe. Or you can embrace what you are and risk everything for something that matters. I chose safety once, and I've regretted it every day since. Whatever you decide, know that I love you. Trust your heart, even when your mind screams danger. Tears blurred my vision as I read her words. Then I heard Calum calling my name, his voice rough with desperation, and I knew my choice was already made. I climbed back up to find the cottage filling with smoke. They'd lit the kindling. Rowan and his men were coughing, eyes streaming, while Calum stood by the cellar door like a wolf guarding its den. When he saw the journal in my hands, something broke in his expression. Please, he said, the word barely audible. Please don't do this. I smiled at him, though my own eyes were tearing from the smoke. 2 coins, I reminded him. That's all I paid for you. Best investment I ever made. Then I opened my mother's journal and began to read the words that would change everything. Chapter 6. The Price of Power. The protection ritual required blood and will in equal measure. I used my mother's silver knife, the one she'd made me promise to keep hidden, and cut my palm, letting crimson drops fall onto the cottage floor in a pattern I somehow knew by instinct. The smoke that had been filling the room began to swirl, responding to something beyond wind or heat. Rowan's men backed away, making warding signs, but Rowan himself watched with calculating eyes. He'd seen magic before, I realized. Maybe even used it himself. Stop her, Calum commanded, but his voice had weakened. The smoke, the strain of fighting his nature, it was all taking a toll. I spoke the words my mother had written, and they fell from my lips like stones into deep water. Each syllable cost me something. I could feel it draining away, whatever force had kept me alive and young and human. The smoke coalesced into shapes, almost figures. Guardians made of ash and will and the fierce determination that had made me spend my last 2 coins on a dying slave. They flowed through the walls like water through cloth, and outside I heard Lord Thorn's men scream. Not in pain, not yet, but in terror at something their minds couldn't process. The smoke creatures didn't kill. They terrified, confused, made weapons fall from numb fingers, and brave men scatter like children from nightmares. But the cost was devastating. I felt my knees buckle as years cascaded away from me like leaves in autumn wind. My hands aged first, smooth skin going rough and spotted, then my arms, my face. I caught a glimpse of myself in the window's reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. Gray had streaked my dark hair. Lines had carved themselves around my eyes and mouth. I'd been 23 that morning. Now I looked twice that age, maybe more. No! Calum's roar shook the cottage. He lunged forward, catching me as I fell, his arms gentle despite their supernatural strength. What have you done? What have you done? Bought time? I gasped, my voice raspy and old. Until midnight. That's all you needed, wasn't it? Outside, Lord Thorn's forces were in full retreat, fleeing from smoke guardians that pursued them through the forest. Rowan moved to the door, watching their panicked flight with grim satisfaction. They won't return tonight, maybe not ever. That kind of fear doesn't fade easily. He turned back to us, his scarred face thoughtful. But word will spread. The King's Council will hear about a healer who used forbidden magic to protect a northern fugitive. They'll send more than a provincial lord next time. They'll send the church's inquisitors. Calum barely seemed to hear him. He'd lowered me carefully to the pallet where he'd lain dying the night before, his hands shaking as they touched my aged face. There must be a reversal. Tell me there's a way to undo this. I wanted to lie, to give him comfort, but my mother's voice echoed in my memory. Once spent, life cannot be reclaimed. What we give to magic, magic keeps forever. No reversal, I whispered. It's done. His expression crumpled, and for a moment I saw past the king, past the Lycan, to something young and broken beneath. I should have died in that dungeon. Would have, if not for your foolish compassion. Not foolish, I said, finding strength from somewhere to lift my hand to his cheek. His skin was warm, alive, the fever gone. Whatever else I'd lost, I'd saved him. That knowledge felt solid and right, even through the grief. Worth it. Every year, every wrinkle, worth it to see you live. Calum caught my aged hand in both of his, pressed his forehead to my palm. I felt wetness, tears from a king who'd probably learned early that tears were weakness. I owe you a debt I can never repay, he said hoarsely. 2 lifetimes worth of debt now. I swear by my crown, by my blood, by everything I am, I will find a way to give you back what you've lost. Your Majesty, Rowan interrupted gently. The sun is setting. In 3 hours you'll be able to shift fully. What are your orders? Calum straightened slowly, and I watched transformation of a different kind happen. The broken man disappeared, replaced by something harder, colder, regal. We leave before dawn. The northern border is 2 days' ride. If we can reach my people, we'll have an army to answer Lord Thorn's treachery and the southern king's betrayal. He looked down at me, his winter blue eyes fierce with determination. And we'll find someone who can undo what you've done to yourself. A price that steep. There must be a counterprice, a working powerful enough to restore what magic stole. I wanted to believe him, wanted to hope that my sacrifice might somehow be reversed. But my mother's warnings were clear, written in the margins of her journal, with the bitter certainty of experience. Still, as I looked into Calum's eyes and saw his absolute conviction, I found myself nodding. Maybe there was no reversal. Maybe I would carry this aging for the rest of my shortened life. But I'd made my choice freely, and I'd do it again. That had to count for something. Rest now, Calum commanded, his voice softer. When midnight comes and I can shift fully, I'll carry you north. You saved my life. I'll spend mine keeping you safe. As darkness fell beyond my cottage walls, as my aged body finally gave in to exhaustion, I heard Rowan speaking quietly to his men about defensive positions and supplies for the journey. I heard Calum pacing, his footsteps restless and inhuman, counting down the hours until he could fully embrace the monster and the king he truly was. And somewhere deep in my chest, beneath the pain of accelerated aging, I felt something new stirring, a connection I didn't understand, a thread of awareness that linked me to the man I'd bought for 2 coins. My last thought before sleep claimed me was that I'd paid far more than 2 coins now. I'd paid in years I'd never see, in youth I'd never reclaim. And somehow, impossibly, it still felt like a bargain. Chapter 7. The Midnight Hunt. I woke to silver moonlight streaming through my shattered windows and the sound of bones breaking. Not in pain, in transformation. Calum stood in the center of my cottage, his human form unraveling like cloth pulled by invisible hands. His spine arched, elongated, reformed. His face pushed forward into a wolf's muzzle, massive and powerful. Fur erupted across his skin in waves of midnight black, touched with silver frost. When the change completed, the Lycan king stood before me in his true form, a wolf the size of a horse, with eyes that burned like blue fire, and power that made the air itself seem to bend around him. Rowan and his men had fallen to one knee automatically, heads bowed in submission. Even hardened warriors recognized predator hierarchy when it stood before them. Calum's attention fixed on me, and in those burning eyes I saw intelligence that was both wolf and human, monster and king woven into something that transcended both. He moved toward me with liquid grace, and despite everything, my aging body, my exhaustion, my fear, I felt no urge to run. When he lowered his massive head and pressed his nose gently against my aged hand, I heard a sound that might have been a whimper, or might have been a promise. "Your Majesty," Rowan spoke carefully, keeping his eyes lowered. "We should move now, while the darkness covers us. Lord Thorn's forces may regroup by dawn." Calum's response was a growl that vibrated through the floorboards, but he stepped back from me and shifted position, lowering his body, clearly inviting me to climb onto his back. I stared at him in disbelief. "You want me to ride you?" The words sounded absurd even as I spoke them. Rowan actually smiled, the first expression of humor I'd seen crack his scarred face. "A Lycan king carrying a healer on his back through the wilderness. If the songs don't immortalize this, I'll compose them myself." It took 3 of Rowan's men helping to get my aged, exhausted body onto Calum's back. His fur was softer than it looked, and warm, almost fever-hot against my aching joints. When I finally settled into position, my hands gripping the thick ruff of fur at his neck, I felt his muscles bunch beneath me with barely contained power. "I've never ridden anything in my life," I admitted. "Try not to throw me off." The sound Calum made might have been a laugh. Then we were moving, flowing out of my cottage, and into the forest night with speed that stole my breath and made my heart hammer against my ribs. Trees blurred past on either side. The ground flew beneath us. Rowan and his men followed on horses, but even mounted, they could barely keep pace with Calum's supernatural speed. We ran through the night, and despite everything, the fear, the uncertainty, the cost I'd paid, I felt something like joy stirring in my chest. The wind in my face, the moon overhead, the powerful grace of the creature beneath me. It was freedom in a form I'd never imagined. For my entire life, I'd been the poor healer, the suspected witch, the woman who lived at the edges of respectability. Now I was riding through the wilderness on the back of a Lycan king, fleeing toward a future I couldn't predict. Terrifying, exhilarating, exactly what my mother's note had promised. Risk everything for something that matters. We stopped at dawn in a cave system Rowan knew, deep enough in the mountains that Lord Thorn's forces would need days to track us. Calum shifted back to human form, and Rowan's men provided him with clothes from their packs. Sturdy traveling garments that were far from royal, but fit his frame. He came to where I sat against the cave wall, my aged body trembling with exhaustion, and knelt before me with that same careful deliberation he'd shown since I saved his life. "You are shaking," he observed, his accent thicker now, roughened by the shift. "Cold?" I shook my head. "Just tired. Riding a giant wolf through the forest all night tends to drain a woman." His expression flickered. Almost a smile, but not quite. "You did not scream, did not fight. Most would have been terrified." I met his winter blue eyes steadily. "I was terrified, but you wouldn't hurt me. I knew that much at least." Something changed in his face, a vulnerability breaking through his regal mask. "How could you know? I am monster, predator. You bought me at auction like beast, and I repay you with curse, this aging, this suffering." He gestured at my wrinkled hands with barely contained rage. "You should hate me, fear me. Instead, you trust?" His voice broke on the last word, as if trust was the most incomprehensible response I could have offered. "I trust," I confirmed simply. "Don't ask me to explain it. Maybe it's part of whatever magic linked us when I healed you. Maybe I'm just foolish enough to believe in the worth of a dying slave everyone else called defective. But I trust you, Calum Frostvine. I trust that you're worth every year I spent saving you." The silence that followed felt thick with things unsaid. Then Calum did something that stole my breath. He took my aged hand in both of his and pressed his lips to my palm, a gesture of such profound reverence that tears pricked my eyes. "When we reach my kingdom," he said quietly, "I will find the answer. My people have healers older than your southern kingdoms, magic that predates your church's fear. If there is a way to restore what you gave, I will find it. This, I swear." Chapter 8. The Northern Truth. We reached the northern border on the third day, and I understood immediately why the southern kingdoms feared this place. The landscape itself felt wilder, older, touched by magic that had nothing to do with human religion or politics. Trees grew taller here, their bark silver in the moonlight. The air tasted different, sharp with pine and snow even though it was still early autumn. And everywhere I looked, I saw wolves. Not Calum's massive Lycan form, but still larger than natural, moving through the forest with intelligence in their eyes that spoke of shared consciousness with their human counterparts. Rowan's men grew increasingly uneasy as we traveled deeper into Lycan territory. "They're watching us," one muttered, his hand never leaving his sword hilt. "I can feel eyes everywhere." Calum, who'd been walking beside me in human form while I rode one of the horses, I was too weak now to manage his wolfback all day, smiled without humor. "Of course they watch. You are southern soldiers in the heart of the north, but they will not attack. Not while you travel under my protection." As if summoned by his words, 3 massive wolves emerged from the tree line ahead, blocking our path. They were smaller than Calum, but still enormous, their fur ranging from pure white to charcoal gray. The lead wolf, the white one, shifted as we watched. The transformation was faster than Calum's had been, more practiced, and within heartbeats a woman stood before us. She was tall, warrior-built, with silver hair that fell to her waist and eyes like chips of ice. She wore leather armor marked with sigils I didn't recognize, and a sword hung at her hip with the ease of long familiarity. "Calum Frostvane," she said, her voice carrying the lilting accent of the far north. "The dead king returns. The ancestors must be laughing." Calum's expression went carefully blank. Thyra Wolfsong. "Still hunting in the borderlands, I see." "Someone has to guard what's left," Thyra replied, her ice-chip eyes sweeping over our group before fixing on me with uncomfortable intensity. "And you bring southern soldiers and—" She paused, nostrils flaring as she scented the air. "A healer witch who reeks of blood magic and self-sacrifice." She moved closer, studying my aged face with the clinical assessment of a predator evaluating prey. "What did you give for him, little witch? 10 years? 20? I lifted my chin, refusing to show the fear her casual power inspired. "Whatever it took." Thyra's laugh was sharp as broken glass. Brave or stupid. Perhaps both. She turned back to Calum. You should have stayed dead, my king. The north fell. Your capital burns. Your people scattered. Whatever kingdom you left behind is ashes now. The pain that flashed across Calum's face made my chest tight. Then I will build it anew. Gather what survives. Take back what was stolen. Thyra shook her head slowly. You don't understand. It wasn't just invasion, Calum. It was betrayal from within. Your own council sold you to the Southern King. Wolfsbane and silver in your wine. Then that poisoned blade to finish what the drink started. They wanted you gone. Wanted to negotiate peace by surrendering everything you fought to protect. And when the Southern forces came, half your warriors opened the gates willingly. The silence that followed her words was absolute. Even the wind seemed to still. Calum stood frozen, his face draining of color, and I saw his hands begin to shake. Subtle tremors that spoke of rage too vast for human expression. Who? The word came out barely above a whisper, but it carried such violence that Rowan's men backed away instinctively. Give me names, Thyra. Who betrayed their king? Thyra's expression was sad now, the predator replaced by something that looked like grief. Your cousin Aldrich led the conspiracy. Said you'd become too wild, too much monster, and not enough man. That peace required a king willing to bend the knee to Southern authority. I watched Calum's composure shatter like glass. He turned away from us, his breathing harsh and ragged, and I could see the wolf rising beneath his skin, fur rippling, claws extending, as he fought for control. Without thinking, I slid down from my horse and moved to him, my aged body protesting every step. Calum, I said softly. He didn't respond, so I touched his arm gently. Look at me. Slowly, so slowly, he turned. His eyes had gone gold, the wolf ascendant. And for a moment I thought he might shift right there, might tear through the forest in a rage that would leave only destruction in its wake. But then his gaze focused on my face, and something in my expression seemed to anchor him. You are shaking, he said, the same words he'd spoken in the cave, but this time with desperate need beneath them. Yes, I agreed, because I'm frightened. Not of you, for you. You're hurting, and I can feel it like a wound in my own chest. His hands came up to frame my aged face with infinite care. How can you still look at me with such softness? I am king who failed his people. Monster who brings only death. You gave years of your life for creature who could not even protect his own kingdom. I smiled sadly. I gave years for a man who tried. That's all any of us can do. Try, and hope it's enough. Calum's composure finally broke completely. He pulled me against his chest, burying his face in my gray-streaked hair, and I felt his shoulders shake with sobs he'd probably been holding back for months. I wrapped my aged arms around him and held on, offering the only comfort I had. My presence, my acceptance, my stubborn refusal to see him as anything less than worthy of the sacrifice I'd made. Behind us, I heard Thyra speak quietly to Rowan. She'll be his strength now, that witch. He'll rebuild the kingdom for her, even if he wouldn't do it for himself. And listening to Calum's ragged breathing slowly steady against me, I thought she might be right. Chapter 9. The Blood Crown. Thyra led us deeper into the northern mountains, to a settlement hidden in a valley that seemed to exist outside of normal geography. Here, the survivors of Calum's kingdom had gathered, perhaps 300 souls where there should have been thousands. Men, women, children, all bearing the marks of recent trauma and desperate survival. They emerged from crude shelters as we approached, their eyes widening in disbelief as they recognized the figure walking at the front of our group. The king, someone whispered. The king lives. The whisper became a murmur, became a roar, and suddenly we were surrounded by wolves in both human and animal form, all bowing, all weeping, all reaching toward Calum with desperate hope. He stood frozen in the center of their adoration, his face a mask of controlled emotion. But I could feel what he was holding back, the crushing weight of survivor's guilt, the rage at betrayal, the grief for what he'd lost. When an elderly woman dropped to her knees before him, her face wet with tears, saying, "I knew you'd come back, my king. I knew you'd save us." I saw something crack in his composure. He helped her stand gently, but his hands shook with the effort of maintaining control. "I failed you," he said, his voice rough. "Let your capital burn. Let our people scatter. How can you welcome the king who brought only destruction?" The old woman cupped his face with weathered hands. "You fought for us when others surrendered. You trusted where others betrayed. If you failed, it was only in expecting honor from those who had none to give." She looked past him to where I stood, and her eyes widened at my aged appearance. "And this one, she bears the mark of great sacrifice. What did she give for you, my king?" Calem's hand found mine, pulled me forward to stand beside him. Everything. Her youth, her years, her safety. She bought me at auction for 2 coins when I was dying. She used forbidden magic to heal me. She risked execution to protect me. And I have given her nothing but suffering in return. A murmur ran through the gathered Lycans. Thyra stepped forward, her ice-chip eyes assessing. "A blood debt, then. The deepest kind." She turned to address the crowd. "This woman, this healer witch, saved our king when he was lost. She deserves our protection, our gratitude, and our loyalty, as if she were born of our blood." The crowd's response was immediate, a howl that started with the wolves and was taken up by the humans, a sound of acceptance and promise that raised the hair on my arms. But one voice cut through the celebration like a knife. "Our king returns with a southern witch and asks us to bow to her?" A man pushed through the crowd, tall and broad-shouldered, with Calem's same winter-blue eyes and a face that might have been handsome, if not for the cruelty twisting his features. "Aldrich," Calem said, his voice dropping to something deadly. "Cousin." "Traitor." The crowd went silent. Aldrich's smile was cold. "Traitor? I saved what remained of our people by negotiating surrender instead of letting you lead us all to glorious death. You were always too much wolf, too little king. The South would have slaughtered us all if I hadn't." He never finished. Calem moved with speed that blurred, crossing the distance between them in a heartbeat. His hand closed around Aldrich's throat, lifting him off his feet with supernatural strength. "You poisoned me, sold me to the Southern King, opened our gates to invaders, and you dare call it salvation?" Aldrich struggled, but Calem's grip was iron. "You were going to get us all killed," he choked out. "Your pride, your refusal to bend." "My refusal to surrender our freedom," Calem corrected softly. "Our right to live as we chose, not as the South demanded. That was worth fighting for, worth dying for." His eyes had gone molten gold, the wolf fully present. "And you will die for your betrayal." I felt the moment he would do it, the shift in his energy that meant Aldrich's neck would snap in the next heartbeat. "Calem," I called, my aged voice carrying across the sudden silence. "Don't." He turned his head to look at me, Aldrich still dangling from his grip. "He betrayed everything, killed my people, destroyed my kingdom. Why should I show mercy?" I moved closer, my body protesting every step, until I stood beside them. Because mercy is what separates a king from a tyrant. Because execution without trial is what the South does, not what you do. Because my voice dropped to something only he could hear. Because if you kill him like this in rage, you'll regret it when the anger fades, and you carry enough regret already. Calem stared at me for a long moment. Then slowly he lowered Aldrich to the ground and released his throat. "Trial at dawn," he announced to the crowd. "Let the pack decide Aldrich's fate according to our laws." He turned back to his cousin, who was gasping for air. "Until then, You will be confined under guard. Pray that their judgment is more merciful than mine would have been." As guards moved forward to take Aldrich away, Calum swayed slightly. The strain of controlling the wolf, of facing his betrayer, of being what his people needed, it was taking a visible toll. I caught his arm, steadying him. "You need rest," I said firmly. He looked down at me with eyes that were still more gold than blue. "How can I rest? My kingdom is ashes. My people are broken. My own blood betrayed me." "Then rest anyway," I replied. "Because tomorrow you'll need strength to rebuild it all. And I didn't spend 20 years of my life to watch you collapse from exhaustion before you begin." The ghost of a smile touched his lips. "You are stubborn, healer." "And you're an idiot king who thinks he has to carry everything alone," I countered. "Fortunately, you bought yourself a witch who's just as stubborn. So lean on me and let's find somewhere you can sleep before you fall over." Thyra's laugh cut through the tension. "I like her. She speaks to you like a person instead of a crown." She gestured toward a larger shelter at the valley's center. "The royal tent, what passes for one these days. Rest, Calum. We'll guard while you sleep." That night I sat beside Calum while he finally surrendered to exhaustion. In sleep, the lines of pain and responsibility faded from his face, leaving something younger, almost vulnerable. I found my aged hand reaching out to touch his hair, still that same silver black that had caught my eye at the auction. "2 coins, I whispered. "Best investment I ever made, you impossible wolf king." And watching his chest rise and fall with steady breathing, surrounded by the broken remnants of a kingdom that had yet to be rebuilt, I meant every word. Chapter 10. The Covenant of Stars. Dawn came cold and clear, painting the hidden valley in shades of silver and gold. The trial was held in a clearing marked with ancient stones, a place where Lycan law had been dispensed for centuries. Aldrich stood in the center, bound with silver chains that burned his skin wherever they touched. Around him, the surviving pack members gathered in a circle, human and wolf forms mingling. Calum stood before his cousin, no longer the broken fugitive I'd bought for 2 coins, but every inch a king, proud, terrible, and absolutely in command. "Aldrich Frostvine," he began, his voice carrying across the silent assembly. "You stand accused of treason, conspiracy to murder your king, and betrayal of your people." "How do you answer?" Aldrich lifted his chin defiantly. "I did what was necessary to preserve our race. Your pride would have seen us all destroyed." The crowd murmured, but Calum raised a hand for silence. "Let him speak his defense. That is our law." What followed was a testament to how fractured the Northern Kingdom had become. Aldrich spoke of Calum's supposed recklessness, his refusal to negotiate, his willingness to let the pack die rather than submit. And to my horror, some in the crowd nodded along, swayed by his words. But then Thyra stepped forward. "I was there," she said quietly, "when the southern forces came. I saw what happened when we opened the gates as Aldrich promised would bring peace." Her voice hardened. "They slaughtered anyone who looked at them wrong. They burned our libraries, destroyed our histories, enslaved our children. The peace Aldrich bought us was extinction in slow motion." She turned to face the crowd. "Calum fought to preserve not just our lives, but our freedom to be what we are. Aldrich fought to save himself by sacrificing everything that made us worth saving." The mood shifted, anger replacing uncertainty. Other voices rose, those who'd witnessed the betrayal, who'd lost family to Aldrich's treachery. When the testimony ended, Calum looked to me. "You spoke of mercy yesterday. You said execution without trial was the South's way, not ours. The pack has heard the evidence. What would you have me do now?" I stood slowly, my aged body protesting, and moved to stand beside the king. "I'm not Lycan. I have no right to speak to your laws." Calum's hand found mine. "You have every right. You saved the king these people are judging. Your sacrifice bought the chance for justice to exist at all. Speak." I looked at Aldrich, saw the fear beneath his defiance, and felt no satisfaction. Only sadness for how completely he'd failed to understand what he was destroying. "Exile," I said finally. "Stripped of name and pack, sent into the world alone. Death would be mercy for a crime like his. Let him live with what he's done, knowing he can never return home." A murmur ran through the assembly, approval mixed with surprise. Calum studied his cousin for a long moment. "Aldrich Frostvane, you are hereby stripped of your bloodline's protection and your place in this pack. You will be marked as Oathbreaker and cast out beyond our borders. If you are ever found in the North again, the sentence will be death. Do you understand?" Aldrich's face had gone ashen. "Exile? You might as well kill me. Alone, without pack." "Exactly," Calum said softly. "You will experience what you condemned our people to when you betrayed them. Isolation, vulnerability, the knowledge that no one will mourn your passing. Perhaps in your exile, you'll find the understanding that eluded you in power." As guards moved forward to remove Aldrich's silver chains and escort him to the border, Calum turned to address his people. "Our kingdom fell. Our capital burned. We have lost much, too much. But we survive. And where there is survival, there is hope for rebuilding." His voice strengthened, carrying the weight of absolute conviction. "I was dead, and I was reborn. So too will the North be reborn, stronger and wiser for what we've endured." Thyra stepped forward, dropping to one knee. "What are your orders, my king?" One by one, the others followed, human and wolf alike, kneeling in the ancient gesture of pack loyalty. And in that moment, watching a broken kingdom begin to knit itself back together around the man I'd saved, I felt something shift in my chest. The connection I'd sensed since healing him solidified into certainty. Our fates were woven together now, bound by blood and magic and sacrifice too deep to ever fully untangle. "Rise," Calum commanded. "All of you, rise. We kneel to no one anymore, not to the south, not to fear, not even to despair. We stand as we were meant to, free, proud, and unbroken." As the crowd rose, cheering, Salem turned to me. His winter blue eyes held something that made my aged heart stutter. Determination mixed with tenderness, power mixed with vulnerability. "Walk with me," he said quietly, offering his arm. We left the clearing as his people began to organize, already planning the work of rebuilding. Calum led me to a high overlook where we could see the entire hidden valley spread below us. "My grandmother once told me a story," he began, his accent thick with memory, "about the first Lycan king who found his mate dying and gave her his immortality to save her life. The price was steep. He would age as humans do, die as humans do. But for the time they had together, they built a kingdom that lasted 1,000 years. I felt tears prick my eyes. "Why are you telling me this?" He took both my aged hands in his. "Because you saved my life twice now. Once with your healing, once with your mercy. Because you gave me years I don't deserve. Because when I look at you, I see not the face that age has marked, but the heart that chose compassion over safety, chose me over sense, chose to believe a dying slave was worth 2 coins and 20 years. His voice dropped to something raw and honest. "I am Lycan. We mate for life, and our wolves choose before our human minds understand. Mine chose you the moment you stepped between me and execution. I've been yours since that first touch, even though I didn't know the word for what I felt." "Calum," I breathed, my voice shaking. "I'm old now. You're immortal, or near enough. In 20 years I'll be gone, and you'll have centuries left to—" He silenced me by pressing his forehead to mine, the intimate gesture one I'd seen Lycans use to show absolute trust. "Then we make those 20 years count. I will find a way to reverse what magic stole. My people's healers are the best in the world. But even if I cannot, even if these 20 years are all we have, I would rather have them with you than centuries alone." His voice broke. "You asked me once how I could trust you. Now I ask the same. How can you trust that I'll be enough? That I won't fail you as I failed my kingdom?" I pulled back enough to look into his eyes. "Because you didn't fail. You fought for what mattered, even when others took the easy path of surrender. You showed mercy when rage would have been justified. You built a kingdom worth saving, even if others couldn't see its value." I touched his cheek gently. "And because my 2 coins bought me the most stubborn, infuriating, impossible king in the world, and I wouldn't trade him for anything." Calem's laugh was half sob. Then he kissed me, gentle despite his supernatural strength, reverent despite his power. And in that kiss, I felt the promise of whatever time we had left, 20 years or 2 centuries, it didn't matter. We would face it together. When we finally pulled apart, Calem reached into his pocket and withdrew something that gleamed in the morning light. A crown, simple and ancient, marked with runes I didn't recognize. "This was my grandmother's," he said quietly, "given to the one who rules beside the king, who shares his burdens and his power." He held it up, his hands steady despite the weight of what he was offering. "Mireia Bloodwillow, will you stand with me? Will you help me rebuild what was lost? Will you be my mate, my queen, my heart for whatever time the stars grant us?" I should have said no. I was too old, too tired, too marked by magic to be anyone's queen. But looking into his winter blue eyes, seeing the absolute certainty there, I found myself nodding. "Yes," I whispered. "I'll stand with you. I'll be your queen, your witch, your stubborn conscience when the wolf gets too strong." I smiled through my tears. 2 coins bought me a king. Who am I to argue with that kind of investment? Calem placed the crown on my gray-streaked hair with infinite care, then pulled me close. Behind us I heard cheering. The pack had followed at a respectful distance, and they'd witnessed the whole exchange. Thyra's voice rose above the others. "Long live the queen! Long live the king! Long live the north!" And as the sun climbed higher, painting the hidden valley in light, I stood beside the king I'd saved and felt something I'd never expected to feel again. Hope. The kingdom was still broken. I was still aged beyond my years. The challenges ahead were mountainous and terrifying. But I'd made my choice that day at the auction, to see worth where others saw only defects, to offer compassion where others offered only cruelty. And that choice had bought me not just a king, but a future I'd never dared to imagine. 2 coins. Such a small price for a love that would reshape the world. As Calem took my hand and led me back down to our people, our pack, our kingdom waiting to be rebuilt, I thought of my mother's words. Trust your heart, even when your mind screams danger. I'd trusted, I'd risked, and I'd won everything that mattered. The end. Thank you for reading Mocked for Buying the Defective Wolf Slave for 2 coins. He transformed into the Lycan King at midnight. If this story moved you, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more emotional werewolf romance tales. Share your thoughts below. Would you have spent your last 2 coins on a dying slave? What would you sacrifice for true love? Let me know, and I'll see you in the next story.